Okay, this is part 3 of the Kite circuit sword build, and we're going to start out really quick with the last time I took this case and was starting to mark it up and make modifications, which I have completed off camera just because of the time that it takes. But basically you can see I've got the front cut for the LCD. I don't have the buttons cut because I don't want to do that until I get the bracket installed, which to do that I need to install the lens and then put the screen in here and get it all aligned so it's perfect before I glue it all together, and then I can align these holes to where this bracket ends up in the case. Okay, so on the side cuts, I cut the top for the USB-C port, which is here, and then the volume rocker, which is down here. So just kind of also on the LCD cut, you'll also notice that I used a black Sharpie on the inside lip of this, and that will make it to where that's not very visible when everything's closed up. Alright, so next steps, we're going to put this case in here just to kind of see how it looks. I'm just going to slap it together and we'll see that, yep, USB-C port looks good, volume rocker works. It's a little bit recessed, but it's still, you know, usable. Alright, so the next step that I'm going to do is I'm going to take my screen protector, I'm going to actually affix it to here, and then I'm going to take my screen and bracket and kind of get it roughly fit, hook that up to the circuit sword, I kind of have to bend it like this, power it up, and then carefully like align this and then put a few dabs of hot glue in there. Once I get it to where I want it, then I'll actually take epoxy and affix it permanently. Alright, so I'll start that next. Okay, and here's this step. Like I was saying, I already affixed the screen lens. That looks really nice. You can see it fits perfect. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the screen here, drop it in my bracket. I'm going to peel off this protective layer. And then I'm going to carefully kind of push this into here, and what you're going to notice here is there's actually a lot of wiggle room. Like this bracket moves quite a bit here, and the screen actually has a lot of flexibility to move. So the next step is, like I said, we've got to actually hook this up to this board, turn this on, kind of boot it into a menu, get a screen that has kind of a line at the top so we can actually line it up with this top so it's perfect. Put a few dabs of hot glue and then glue it together. Alright, so back here with after kind of putting the screen in and aligning it. I didn't show this process just because it's very tedious, time consuming, but basically what you do is you put your screen in here, then you take your Kite CSO board and you kind of have to hook everything up. Like you get the sideboard hooked up and the power button hooked up and the Pi installed and your memory card and all that stuff, and then you attach the board right here in the back there, and then you basically kind of have to hold this out like this, boot into the emulation station, and just kind of align the top bar with this until you get it to where you like it, so it's completely flat across the top. So at that point, while you're kind of holding it in place, the other thing is take another hand and tack some hot glue in the various spots, right? I'm not going to stay with hot glue permanently because honestly, it doesn't hold anyways. I mean, looking at some of my other Game Boys that I've built, after a year or so, it becomes kind of brittle. So really, the next step is to take some actual epoxy and do this up. And what I'm going to use here is just some JB Weld, plastic weld 5-minute epoxy. There are probably more clearer choices or better choices. This is just what I have on hand. It works good, and I also like that it's got this little resealable cap. So what I'm going to do here is lay down some epoxy and kind of, you know, around my hot glue areas, and then go from there. So I'm just going to kind of measure out an equal amount of the hardener and resin, maybe. I don't even need that much, just a tiny little bit. And just throw this cap back on there. And that'll keep it fresh. And so what I actually have here is like a kebab skewer that I'm going to use as an applicator and a stir stick. So I kind of broke it in half. I'm just going to use this end to stir this together. And you're going to see I've got my equal parts, so I'm just going to mix that. Just kind of get this nice and mixed up. And you've got, this is a 5-minute cure, so you don't really have a lot of time to work with this. So we just kind of get this good and mixed up. Just kind of get that going there. Okay. So I think that's pretty mixed. So some things too is you're gonna, like I've noticed that I'm gonna have to depress this and kind of hold down. So what I'm gonna use is some tape to hold down some sections while I get this going. It would have been smarter for me to actually have done this before gluing, but you know, as they say, the best laid plans. So I'm going to go ahead and start with taking my little stick with the pointy end and just stick some epoxy. And you don't even need a lot of it. Just going to kind of put it around this post over here. And it's going to kind of soak in anyways, because it's thinner than hot glue, right? Then I'm also going to apply some to the screen, the back of the screen of the bracket. I'm just going to use a couple of quick dabs in the corners. Stuff dries pretty strong. Just kind of holds this in place. Should have probably roughed things up a little bit more, but you know. So I'm just going to drip some of this in there. And eventually what I'm going to do after this is all done, is I'm going to go back and remove the hot glue so it doesn't interfere with anything. Because that's the one problem you get with hot glue, is that it interferes with stuff if you get it too high. Gravity do some of the work here on this epoxy. And I'm also going to lay a little bit down here, because I notice this area, it's always kind of lifting. Maybe I'll lift this tape up, kind of get some around the button wells. Alright, so I think we kind of got all 4 or 5 corners here, and you can definitely tell the stuff is starting to tack up. Trying to see where else I can throw some epoxy in here that would be good. Yep, it looks like I'm really going to have to hold this down until that epoxy dries. Alright, so I'm going to let this cure up and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, we're back. The epoxy has set up pretty nicely. Probably still has another, I'm going to let it cure for another hour before I really mess with it. The next step is getting these front XY buttons drilled. So we've got a little button well guide, and if you just drop this in here, and you can see it kind of wiggles a little bit, so really the trick is kind of line it perfectly up. That's what I do here in the middle, and then just take your Sharpie and just drop it down in there and make a little dot. I actually did that already for both of them, and then what I do after that is I take this little tiny drill bit I've got and I just kind of stick that into the black dot that I made, and you can see really up close that I already kind of pre-drilled those pilot holes. So now our step bit, which we're going to use, we will just go ahead and just use this by hand. You don't want power on this, so it will just nicely kind of find the center of that pilot hole, and we just twist it, applying some downward pressure. Try and keep it as vertical as you can. Get some of the junk out of there. Alright, so it's getting close to breaking free here. I'm just going to kind of keep working it back and forth until it makes it through. And it did. Okay, so at that point we've got a hole. We'll flip it back around to the other side. And we'll insert the bit. And we'll just keep twisting and applying down force. And we gotta go through a bunch of the steps. It's looking good so far. Okay, and you can see that one's looking good, making a mess. Well, we want to go one more step. And we want to be very gentle. Okay, and there you have it. There's the hole. And the nice part is if you can kind of, if you got it up here, you can kind of twist a little bit more towards the next step and give it a nice little kind of, I don't know, what do you call it, countersunk. So now we're going to take our button and drop it in. And look at, there you go. You got a button. So now we can kind of see We got our two buttons there. And of course this guy's not perfectly aligned yet because I don't have everything installed, but let's go ahead and clean up a little bit. And then kind of looking at the next one, we'll start this next one. Alright, next side punches through. And we will just repeat. Okay. And we'll just kind of give a little bit of pressure. Countersink that one too. And there you have it. ABXY. They look pretty good. So you can kind of see from the back side there. They also line up real nicely. Alright, so I guess that is done with the front half of the shell. We'll go ahead and wait for this to set up, and then we'll start doing the back mods and do some more testing here. Alright, it is time to get the front of our Game Boy Zero finished. So last time, like I was saying, we went ahead and we got the screen all epoxied up, which you can see it's nice, it's secure. Yeah, it's not going anywhere. The buttonholes are nice and all ready to go. So let's go ahead and load in our buttons over here. We'll do the, let's see, A is red, and then X will be blue, and then green for Y. So we'll load our buttons up. Well, now one of the things we're going to want to do is, the problem is we want these buttons to stick out as far as they can. So we need a little bit of a spacer. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the screen protector that came with your Game Boy case. Typically it's just the cheap plastic thing. We'll take a hole puncher. We'll just take this in here. Let's make 3 quick hole punches. Missed one, so we'll make another one here. Alright. So now we've got 3 nice little round discs. Actually, I said 3, but I meant 4, didn't I? Apparently I can't count. We'll take a 4th. Okay, so 4 nice little round discs. And so what we'll do is we'll place each one of these inside the center of the button. And then we'll kind of just depress them in using like say the butt of your X-Acto knife. Something like that. this is doing is adding a couple millimeters of thickness to the top of the inside of the cap, and this will allow the buttons to stick out a little bit farther than in factory. I'm going to take this button out and give it a little bit of extra care. Problem is sometimes the hole punching process doesn't really make a nice cut. So you may have to file these things down a little bit. Alright, so I'm going to use some needle noses and jam that guy in there instead. Okay, so those are all inserted. Now what we need to do is add our silicone pads. We'll just take our standard silicone pad, install this one across here. And what we want to do is take another silicone pad and we'll lay it across here, but notice how that's kind of intersecting with this top. So we'll take a razor blade and just nip the top of that off, which I've already done. Which we'll just do like now. We've got to just put this on these little pegs here, hopefully, and everything's all setting in there nicely. Okay, install the start select buttons. Get the D-pad all done. Okay. So I'm going to kind of set this over there. And then what I want to do now is install my circuit sword board. I'm going to take the LCD tabs, release them, insert, and grab the walks here, push them up. Okay. Alright, so everything should be good to drop on in. So let's kind of just drop this in place, being very careful not to jostle the pads around too much. Make sure that the little pegs line up and everything's all nice and flush like it should be. If you've got any kind of like places where the board doesn't want to fit down really nicely, you might want to just check to see that you didn't get any hot glue around places where the board needs to lay flat. Alright, so now we will take a small screwdriver, like this guy, and some of the smaller case screws, not the really long ones, because otherwise they'll punch through, and we'll secure at least a few screws, right? So I got one of them in. That's good enough just to hold it to go flip it over. And now take a look. And look, we got our buttons. They're nice, responsive. Okay, perfect. Start and selects are there. D-pad feels good. Alright, so let's go ahead and finish up putting the screws in here. And it's going to be hard to see, but you know, you got the longer one and the shorter one. So you want the shorter ones. I'm going to put the longer ones over here so I don't get them confused. Those are only used for closing the case. So I'll get these nice and attached here. And there should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these guys. just snug. Don't over tighten. Don't want to strip those posts out. If you did, all is not lost. You most likely could salvage that by putting some epoxy in the center posts. But we don't want to do that. No, we do not. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 screws. Nice. I got some extras here just in case for the back side. Alright, so we are now secured. And we just want to check our fitment with everything. And if it's all laying where it should, then we should be good to go. Alright, so next step is putting the speaker in, which we will do really quickly right now. I'm going to fire up our soldering iron here, which is a Hoolyhoo FX888D. Got our little speaker here and a hot glue gun standing by. So what I'm going to do first is grab the speaker wire, which is just the one with the red and the black, a little tiny Molex connector on the end, or GST I guess. And roughly, you know, I'm just going to put it right here, and then I'm going to run the cable all the way around here. So I'm going to snip a little bit off of this, because I don't really think we need all of this wire, and I really don't like having excess wires laying around, so let's just snip off a couple inches. Very carefully just kind of strip some of the insulation off. Maybe. Yeah, there we go. Wire strippers might be better. And then for completion's sake, we'll use a flux pin. I'm just using a no clean flux. Just going to lick the leads a little bit with that. I'm going to take some of my solder here and my iron. Get my iron all nice and clean. I'm just going to very carefully tin these wires. Alright, so now they are tinned. So now the next step we're going to do is we're going to solder on here, plus and minus. Just going to lick the bottom of these with some flux. And do that just because everything just solders better. Okay. I can't really see it because it's going to be pretty zoomed out. There's a tiny speaker, but I'm going to go ahead and solder the negative on the outside pad here. Followed by the positive. Alright. One nicely soldered up speaker. So, that's no clean flux, so we don't really have to clean it. I usually do anyways, but drop this into the case. I'm going to drop it in right over here on this side, and then route the speaker cord to the connector like so. So to do this, you just need to secure the speaker at this point. So hot glue I'm going to use. This is one place where I want to use hot glue because, you know, if I ever want to replace the speaker, if it blows out or something, I want to be able to easily remove it, and epoxy would be a little bit too permanent for me. So just give it a nice amount of hot glue. All the way around. Okay, well, most of the way around. can just, now that's glued, it should be setting up nicely. Pick off your little hot glue hairs. And then we just take this little cord and plug him into the board ever so gently. And it takes a little bit of fidgeting because I'm holding this up for a camera. There we go. There we are. Okay. Assembled. And then this wire we can just kind of tuck down in here into the body. Actually, you've got that nice little notch in the Game Boy case by the speaker right there that the wires fit nicely into. One thing you can do too if you want to, which wouldn't be a terribly bad idea, is just tack the wires down with some hot glue. Keep them from lifting. So that's what I did. Alright, so at this point the front is done. So next part I'm going to go into how to do the back of the case, and then we'll actually fire this sucker up and see how she runs.